This is one thing in my first message I am sending everyone. I want to break our level.
From battling in the Championship just 6 years ago.
Lovely ball, chance, goal. It's the captain, Tom Kearney, and Fulham lead in the race for that Premier League place.
To now being one of the major contenders for the Champions League.
Picked out John Durant, Neuer nearly caught it. No, Mazan! John Durant! Oh, it's incredible! It's absolutely incredible!
Aston Villa's transformation is nothing short of remarkable. Well, it's not just about smart signings like Martínez and Ollie Watkins, but two visionary managers, Dean Smith and Unai Emery, who have been instrumental in turning Villa from underdogs to a team feared across the Premier League. So what's the secret behind their rise? And what two signings are they away from winning the Champions League? Well, let's talk about that. Aston Villa, one of the oldest clubs in English football, is a team that once held its own against the best of the best. With trophies galore, even a European Cup. Yeah, they were the real deal. But then things changed. Years of ups and downs, slipping out of the Premier League, struggling in the Championship. It was rough. They were practically a ghost of their former selves. Maybe their glory days were done for good. But hold on, this story takes a turn because after all those setbacks, Villa started to claw their way back. And today, with Unai Emery at the helm, people are starting to wonder just how good is this team? But before Unai Emery, there was one person who took them back to the top. And without this man, I doubt Aston Villa would be here today. That man is Dean Smith. Dean Smith grew up a Villa fan, born and raised. Managing the club you supported as a kid was one of his biggest achievements. That's the kind of story that's just begging for a comeback, right? When he took over in 2018, Villa were sitting in the Championship and things were, well, they were rough. But Smith got to work and suddenly it was like a different team. He had this incredible eye for player potential. Take Jack Grealish for example. We all knew he was talented, but under Smith, Grealish became Villa's talisman. The guy that just couldn't be stopped. And the crazy part? Smith pulled it off. After a whirlwind season, he took Villa to the Championship playoffs and they did the impossible. They won promotion back to the Premier League. It was like the Villa faithful were living in a dream. Man, the club was finally back where it belonged and Dean Smith was a hero in the eyes of every Villa fan. This was the start of something big, or so we all thought. But like any good comeback story, there were still a few plot twists on the way. You see, after a couple of seasons, Dean Smith got sacked and they brought in one of the famous managers at the time, Steven Gerrard. When Gerrard stepped in, there was a buzz. I mean, here's a guy who turned Rangers into champions up in Scotland and ended Celtic's 9-year title run. People thought he might just bring that magic to Villa. But man, things didn't go as planned. At first, there were flashes. You'd see Villa play with this spark, glimpses of something special. I mean, he beat teams like Brighton, Everton and Norwich City, scoring 2 goals in all the matches. But then came the inconsistencies, week in, week out. One match, they looked like they could beat anyone. And then, boom! Next match, they'd be dropping points, and for a team trying to rebuild, that was a problem. Gerrard tried to shake things up. He brought in new players, changed formations, tried different tactics, but it just wasn't clicking. I mean, even the club backed him by signing the likes of Philippe Coutinho on loan, Luca Digne and Diego Carlos. And you know how it goes in the Premier League. If you don't perform, pressure builds up fast. Fans were frustrated, results weren't improving, and it all started looking like a mess. Villa was slipping and Gerrard, well, his magic wasn't enough to stop it. So just like that, Gerrard's run came to an end. After 37 games, of which he won just 12 of them, and conceded over 47 goals. It was a tough call, but Villa had to make a change. They needed someone who could stabilise the ship and take them up another level. And trust me, the guy they brought in next was ready to do just that. Now this is a part where it gets interesting. So after sacking Gerrard, Villa decides to bring in Unai Emery. Yeah, Arsenal's former manager. You know the guy with that famous
Good evening.
But don't let that fool you. Emery is serious business. This guy has won the Europa League 4 times. 4! He's practically got a PhD in European football. Villa wasn't just bringing in another manager, they were bringing in a tactician with a game plan. He's not doing that well in his league games, but you could see that Unai Emery was a fantastic tactician. Right from the start, you could see the difference. Emery didn't just waltz in and ask everyone to play the same old way. No, he drilled Villa into becoming a disciplined, well-oiled machine. Suddenly, they were playing with structure, pressing smart, defending like their lives depended on it. Every player had a specific role and knew exactly what they needed to do. And get this, it didn't take long for results to show up. I mean, how do you turn up on your first game to win against Manchester United 3-1 in your first ever game, making it the first time since 1995 that Manchester United was beaten by Aston Villa? I mean, this guy has started breaking records from his first game. Emery's impact was almost immediate. Villa went from just trying to survive each match to competing with the big boys by winning 12 games in his first 18 matches. And here's the wild part. He's got them playing with this calm confidence, like they belong at the top. Emery wasn't here to just survive. He's got Villa dreaming bigger. I mean, how do you take a mid-table club to get the 7th spot in the Premier League behind the likes of Manchester United and Tottenham, which had their highest finish since 2010-11? Not only that, he was able to lead Aston Villa to the European Conference League. You see, part of his major success is Aston Villa balled down to the kind of players he met. I mean, he met a team full of players who did not know how to play to their strengths, and that was what he did. I mean, he met the likes of Ollie Watkins, who was the most underrated striker, Douglas Luiz, who was one of the best central midfielders in the Premier League, Leon Bailey, and also World Cup winner Emiliano Martínez, not to mention players like Jacob Ramsey, Konza, and John McGinn. From all of these players, he was able to make one of the best squads in the Premier League, something managers like Erik ten Hag can't do. Sorry, Man U fans. After his first season, the club backed him up as they had a lot of trust in him that he would perform well, and they believed that he would do better than Steven Gerrard, who they'd previously supported in the transfer market. They went on to sign Pau Torres from Villarreal, who Emery had worked on for 33 million, and Moussa Diaby from Bayer Leverkusen. After a 5-1 defeat to Newcastle, he decided to change things up, and this would lead him to lead Villa to their highest Premier League total after 19 games. He led the team to maintain a 100% record in their first 8 games at home. At the end of his second season, he led Aston Villa to a 4th place finish, taking them to the Champions League and also a semi-final finish in the Conference League. And people thought that would be the peak for Aston Villa in the league, but this was far from it. Unai Emery would go on to make this side one of the most potent sides in the Champions League, above teams like Arsenal, Manchester City and Bayern on the table. But how did he do that? And what tactics did he deploy? He implemented something called the box midfield and rotational triangle. It sounds technical, I know, but it's pretty slick when you see it in action. Villa sets up in a 4-2-3-1 on paper, but during the game it's more like a 4-2-2-2. Emery's midfielder Ross Barkley drops deep, creating a square or box with the defenders. This setup helps them retain possession and control the midfield, which used to be a big problem for Villa in the past. Now, instead of being on the back foot, Villa dominates the centre of the pitch and builds attacks with confidence. But here's where it gets even cooler. Emery doesn't focus on traditional wide play. Instead, his wingers move into the centre to create more passing options, leaving the flanks open. This drags the opposition out of position, which allows Villa to play these sneaky central passes that carve open defences. And when the ball does go wide, it's perfectly timed. Players like Watkins make runs to receive those passes, either to hold up play or take on defenders directly. Speaking of Watkins, he's been a revelation under Emery. He's not just scoring goals, he's also acting as a focal point for Villa's attack. With his strength and ball control, he can hold off defenders and wait for support, which is crucial for Villa's attacking flow. When Watkins runs off the ball, he pulls defenders out of shape, creating space for the midfield to surge forward. It's like every player knows exactly where to be, creating this constant pressure that's a nightmare for opponents to defend against. Oh, and defensively, they're just as organised. Villa keeps one of the highest defensive lines in the league, which is risky but also super effective. But with players like Pau Torres, this has worked well. The team sets up in a tight 4-4-2 shape when out of possession, blocking central passes and forcing opponents wide. Once they get the opposition out to the wings, Villa's wide players press aggressively, making it hard for anyone to build momentum against them. But for them to win the Champions League, or even have a shot at winning it, they must work on something. But before we get into that, please take a few seconds to subscribe to the channel. It would really help us. Thank you. Now back to the video. First is at right back. Now, don't get me wrong, Matty Cash has been solid, but there's room to improve. In the match against Spurs, Son completely exploited that right side and Cash just couldn't keep up, which led to Tottenham's first goal and got them right back into the game. It's moments like that where you can see a slight upgrade could make a difference. If you're serious about going far in Europe, they might want to look at someone like Tino Livramento in January. He'd fit perfectly into Emery's system with his speed, pressing ability and calmness on the ball. And then there's Konza at centre-back. He's improving, but if we're talking Champions League ambitions, he's maybe just shy of that top level. Someone like Mark Gahey or even Marco Senesi from Bournemouth could add that extra bit of stability and confidence at the back. Gahey's composure and tackling, or Senesi's passing range and strength, could be exactly what Villa needs to be more resilient when it matters most. Now, aside from replacing players, one of the biggest issues that's held them back in the league is a tendency to switch off. In midfield and defence, there have been these lapses. We saw it against Spurs where they lost focus and conceded that goal. It's been a pattern, and while it hasn't cost them every game thanks to the absolute heroics of Emiliano Martínez, it's still a problem. That man saved them against Bayern with 2 stunning stops that should have been goals. But over-relying on Martínez is risky business. As good as he is, he can't save everything. Another thing that you've got to fine-tune is the high line. It's so effective most of the time, but now and then it leaves them exposed to those perfectly timed runs. European teams like PSG or Barcelona will be ready to pounce on that. Think about players like Vitinha or De Jong. They live for exploiting spaces like that. If Villa can tighten up on these small issues, maybe bring in a few players who can help them stay sharp and focused at the back, they could be looking at a real shot at European dominance. But what do you think? Can he dominate Europe? By the way, you can check out this video where I predict if Ruben fails at Man United or not.